Welcome to today's webinar titled Challenges of Changing Schools. We are thrilled to have Michael Scott with us today. Michael Scott was raised in a military family and remembers well the many rewards and challenges experienced as a child with a father in the Navy. As an adult, Michael attained a master's degree in counseling from Old Dominion University and has experience providing counseling to military families and their children as a therapist in a children's mental health inpatient facility. Michael brings an ongoing passion for service members and their families to his current role as clinical trainer for the Military OneSource program. Without further delay, I will turn things over to Michael Scott.
Yes, hi everyone, and thank you very much, Stan, for the introduction. I'd also like to thank you all for attending this webinar, Challenges of Changing Schools. As Stan mentioned, I do indeed have the pleasure of having grown up with a father in the Navy, and I am very aware of many of the challenges, and I'll also add many of the benefits of changing schools frequently. It was such a real part of my life growing up that even to this day, all of my childhood memories are categorized by where I happened to be living at the time. I remember beginning preschool in Charleston, South Carolina, and then I believe we moved another 8 times, just about every 2 years before I graduated from high school. I think I actually got so accustomed to it that I even kept moving every 2 years for the next 15 or so after I'd graduated. And I'm sure my experiences are not unique, especially among this crowd that may be listening. And I certainly wish you all the best as you consider your next move. Whether it's your first or your 10th, it is hard to change schools. There are so many adjustments you have to make, things to worry about and prepare for, and there really is quite a lot to be said on the topic. But before we get rolling with this presentation, I want to first encourage everyone to consider having a piece of paper and a pen handy, as I'd love to be able to answer any questions that may occur to you along the way, and this way you can write them down when you think of them. Also, I'll be sharing some helpful websites and resources along the way as well, and you may want to write some of those down. And secondly, I will share with you this short disclaimer. The appearance of hyperlinks does not constitute endorsement by the Department of Defense of this website or the information, products, or services contained therein. For other than authorized activities such as military exchanges and morale, welfare, and recreation sites, the Department of Defense does not exercise any editorial control over the information you may find at these locations. Such links are provided consistent with the stated purpose of the Department of Defense, of this Department of Defense sponsored webinar. All right, so there really is just one objective for this training, and that is to share with you tips for making a smooth transition to a new school and for making new friends. At this point, I'd also point out that this training is really geared toward an audience of school-age children, but I recognize that it will likely be mostly parents and guardians listening today. So I hope that perhaps you'll carry this information back to your children or even encourage them to view the presentation themselves, as it will be recorded and eventually available on the Military OneSource website. So from here on out, I'll present it as if the kids themselves who are viewing or listening to the presentation. All right, so to familiarize you with a quick agenda for this presentation, first, of course, there is an introduction. Then we'll spend some time considering some of the benefits of changing schools in contrast to many of the challenges we probably all have on our minds. We'll review some helpful things you can do to make it a little easier. We'll talk about some things you can do to make new friends. And, of course, we'll talk about some of the academic side over it and go over some tips for keeping your grades up. All right, so first, this introduction is really an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the hard parts or the difficulties or struggles or problems or issues or worries or whatever you want to call them. Personally, I do like to call them challenges, and you'll notice that that's part of the reason this is titled The Challenges of Changing Schools. And the reason I think challenges is a good word here is that when we talk about the way we talk about things makes a difference in how we think about them. When we talk about challenges, we almost instinctively find ourselves thinking about how to overcome them rather than getting bogged down with them. So one of the challenges is that the whole process of changing schools is really just scary. And sometimes the things that scare us the most are those things we really don't know a whole lot about. And there are an awful lot of those things that go along with changing schools. And not usually just changing schools either. Usually we're talking about new neighborhoods, new sports teams, new kids, new weather, new clothing styles, new cliques, and everything else that goes with a move of any kind. So even just reviewing all of that in my own head brings up feelings of anxiety and discomfort around the whole thing. I remember going into the third grade and starting a brand new school in Mayport, Florida, and throwing what I think may have been the very last full-on tantrum I have ever thrown. I remember kicking and screaming in protest to go into the school that first day. And honestly, when I think back, I don't remember how my mother must have dealt with that, but I do remember going to school, and I remember many of the friends I made throughout that year. So I can speak from experience. It is all overcomable. So there must be a number of questions that each of you may have with so many different ages and cultures and families out there, but here's just a few that I remember even asking myself when I found myself going to a new school. Questions like, will the other kids like me? Or will anyone sit with me at lunch? That one in particular gives me anxiety to this day because I remember how nerve-wracking it is, and that weirdness that you feel as you walk into the lunchroom that first day, or really just maybe even the first couple of days, because it does go away pretty quickly, and it's pretty quick that you'll eventually find some friends or a friend that you can sit with. Also questions like, will I be able to handle the schoolwork? What kind of teachers will I have? And when we think about all of these questions, our minds really can run away with it. In fact, one of the best parts about dealing with this worry that we may have about changing schools and dealing with it so frequently is that we really actually get pretty good at keeping worry at bay. We know there's certainly enough to think about prior to moving without getting bogged down in what's going to happen after we move. Another point to note is that some of you may really like changing schools, and it's likely that some of you don't. And even that sentence is full of problems because there are so many things that can affect how you feel about changing schools, even just day to day. Some parts of the change versus other parts, whether it's the middle of the year or the end of the year, whether you have great friends where you are leaving from or friends that you may just be ready to get away from. There's a whole crowd of reasons why some people do and some people don't. And some people feel both ways regularly about changing schools. But whatever your feelings, it's important to know that it's normal and that that's okay. Again, there's so much happening right now before you move that if you spend a lot of time worrying about what's to come, you might miss some really important moments before you go. All right, so you probably also already know this, but obviously if you are in a military family, you'll likely have to move more than many of the other kids in your school. This is made clear every time that it actually is you who's the one moving away. Although I will say, though, that living in military towns or going to base schools does put you in company of kids who probably know what it's like. And just like you're listening to this here, learning new ways to make the best of situations can really help and alleviate some of that anxiety, and we'll certainly talk about some of that as well. And so that was sort of an introduction, and it really does acknowledge the challenges that await you with this change of schools. Though I'm sure, again, you probably didn't need me to remind you of them all. But let's take a minute then to also talk about some of the more positive aspects of changing schools. It is important, of course, to talk about the good parts about moving too, because it reminds us that, again, we can make the best of a situation by focusing on some of these good things, and the way we look at some of these things really does affect how we feel about them. So we think about these three in particular. You do get to make a fresh start, you get to make new friends, and you get to get involved in new activities. The interesting thing about this list is that each of them is a positive way to look at some of these things that are also really scary. Each is the result of overcoming the challenges noted on the previous slide. You overcome the move itself, and you get the chance to, in some small way, reinvent yourself. If there was a kid in your previous school you just couldn't get along with, or if there was something weird that happened and you were getting teased about something, any of those kinds of things that were unpleasant about where you live, again, you do get to leave them behind and make a completely new start. And this really is the aspect of moving that I used to love about it. And it's the reason why I continued moving even after I got out on my own. I knew that any bad impressions were always only temporary, and I knew that I could try a different approach with the next move if something didn't work out. You also get to make new friends. Once you've survived the worry about actually making new friends and the initial awkwardness, you do end up with friends in both the previous place as well as friends in the new place. You do get to practice and try new ways to make friends, new ways to fit into different groups of friends, and what's really wonderful is you gain an understanding for a lot of different kinds of people. You learn to fit in with all different kinds of groups and cliques and gain sensitivities for other kids who may be new to the school too. Pretty soon you get so good at it that you not only get to make new friends, but you get actually pretty comfortable making new friends with just about anyone. And this is absolutely a skill that you'll come to appreciate throughout your life. I hope you hear some of the enthusiasm for this particular piece on my part, because it is a hard thing, but it has such wonderful results. And then finally, you do get to get involved in new activities and try new things with different groups of kids. And I'm sure you all have a sense of what this means, but the bottom of it all, you do get to kind of, again, reinvent yourself. And I think that I always found that enjoyable. Okay, so after considering some of the challenges and then some of the positives for changing schools, here's some things you can do to make it all go just a little easier. You can certainly keep in touch with friends from the previous school. And a point I want to make is that it really is important to make a concerted effort to keep in touch. When you move so frequently, it does get easier over time. And some of us might think, phew, thank goodness it gets easier. But there is a grief associated with leaving friends behind. And when we're feeling that grief, we tend to want to find a way to make it end. And when we do that, sometimes it occurs to us to try to get over it. Our thoughts like, well, I never really liked that kid anyway, or that those people weren't that important to me, or the whole, this hurts, but if I can convince myself that I don't care, then it won't hurt me as much. And sometimes thinking like this can be helpful in the moment, but if we do make it a habit, a habit of not caring, it can kind of harden our hearts over time. And then it can really be tough to soften those hearts back up. Sometimes that can really make it hard to make lasting friendships. It can cause us to become guarded and distrustful because we don't want to have to hurt again. It can get really easy to make good impressions, good first impressions, but again, it could be all on the surface. So, I want to say this may all sound kind of strange to some of the younger of you out there, but I think for some of the older ones, it can be helpful to remember this. There's some things that we can do to avoid this hardening of our heart, and one of those things is to talk with our parents about how we're feeling, and certainly, again, staying in touch with previous friends. This is even easier now, and I'm sure you all know, with things like Skype and FaceTime and email, and setting those things up ahead of time with the friends you're leaving behind can go a long way towards helping you maintain those friendships. Okay, so moving along, dealing with some of the other unknowns is pretty important too, and familiarizing yourself with your new town, neighborhood, and school can help in a variety of ways. It's great if you have an opportunity to even tour the school prior to your first day there and ultimately answer some of the questions you may have about the school. Now it's nice because we have websites for the school that can help to answer many of the unknown questions about the school itself. And of course, you can also go to military1source.com, which has a link for a website called militaryinstallations.com, which gives you a ton of information about the base your parents may be being stationed to. And that'll lead to information about the town, the school, the neighborhoods, the parks, and all kinds of other things that you can learn about where you're going that can serve to ease some of the worry. All right, so once you do get to the new place, certainly making friends is a high priority for most of us. And here's some ideas that can help you start the process. And the first and top of the list is to smile. Just to make the note, a genuine smile goes a really long way towards inviting others to come to you. And sometimes that's all you have to do. It makes making friends easy. Joining clubs, there's all kinds of clubs in schools worth considering, depending on the things you like to do. When I think back, I remember drama clubs and band and yearbook and foreign language and on and on. So the point here is to make that point to get involved. I'll note that there's certainly risks associated with putting yourself out there, but once you overcome that initial discomfort, the rewards for having the courage to do so really are endless. Of course, you can participate in sports, and you all know what this means, but I think it's important to note that whether you think of yourself as good at a sport or not shouldn't play as much a role as the degree to which you think you'll have fun playing it. Once you put yourself out there, once again, you'll improve, without a doubt, and you'll meet a whole lot of people. You can also consider group classes, whether inside or outside of the school, and rec centers and neighborhood groups have all kinds of activities organized. And with some simple searching, you can find a group or a club these days that gathers to do just about anything you could possibly think of. You can spend some time, again, depending on your age and interests. Spending some time at parks and playgrounds can be a great place to meet other people. It could be anything from a pickup game of basketball or soccer to skateboarding, and I've even seen some drum circles and things like that form at a park near our house. At the bottom of it all, it really does take some concerted effort to get out there and to take some social risks in order to meet new people. This can be uncomfortable every time for some, and for others it can come really easily, but it's always worth it. It takes time to make new friends, and making new friends goes far beyond just that first impression, but that's often where they start. And the activities above, just noted, are great for creating situations where ongoing contact will occur and will naturally provide time for the relationship to grow. All right, so some more specific tips to consider, and the first in the top of the list there is to be a good listener. And I often ask myself, what really does this mean? We certainly hear our parents tell us to listen, but what does that really mean? And it means a lot of things. It means not talking while someone else is talking, or not interrupting. It means asking relevant questions and taking an interest in something that someone is telling you. And you can certainly learn something from everyone if you just take that moment to hear what they're saying and to listen. It's tempting for us to want to talk and share what's on our own minds, but that other person feels the same way. And people do love it when they feel heard and understood. So if someone feels like you get them because you've been listening with interest, you'll have no doubt made a friend. I'll offer another quick point here. It's tempting as well to want to share all of the really interesting differences you may be seeing every day between your new friends, your new school, your neighborhood, various teams you may be on, and sharing them as simply interesting differences can be fine. But what can sometimes get tiresome for others, though, is when in some way you're indicating that where you come from was in some way better than where you are. And while you might actually believe this, the others that you're talking to probably won't. These are good things to talk with your parents about, or maybe even to talk with friends that you left in the previous place about. All right, so another point is to ask people about themselves. This is certainly a wonderful thing to do. If there's one thing that's true in the world, it's that most people are eager to tell you about themselves. And we are too, right? Generally, people are so unaccustomed to having a free-range opportunity to tell you about themselves that they almost can run away with it. But as you listen, you'll hear occasions where you can share about you in the context of what they are sharing about themselves. People really do love others who will listen to them talk about themselves, and so it seems a little strange, but it's true. Another point to note is to accept people as they are. This, I think, is a lifelong lesson, but it's one to definitely keep at the forefront of our minds. I think all of us have a desire to be accepted, and finding ourselves comparing other people to other people or putting them into groups based on characteristics that we're seeing or trying to change something about someone else can sometimes actually be really offensive to other people. And it does make it harder to make friends if you're seen as judgmental. So while those thoughts may occur to you, I think it's often natural for them to do so. It's probably best to keep them to yourselves and to actually train yourself to find desirable qualities in everyone. This can actually be kind of difficult, so it helps if you remember to often ask yourself something like, what's the coolest thing about this person that I'm talking with? And once you have a sense of that, to either file it away for yourself or to share it with them that you've noticed, or even others. This can be a great way to learn about people and to make friends. I think it can be tempting to identify negatives and even share some of those things, but that's gossip and probably not going to help you make friends anyway. So remember to find the positive things about the people that you're meeting and to accept them as they are. Another thing you can do is certainly to just be helpful. There are all kinds of ways to do that, but I always picture a scene from TV a long time ago where, the classic where you see the teenage boy is clumsily carrying the books of the girl he might be interested. This is the image that I have for being helpful, but there's opportunities all over the place to be helpful to everyone, everywhere. So take advantage of them. This is an absolute fastest way to make a friend. You can also give compliments, and I think they usually go over best when they're genuine and naturally occurring. So keep your thoughts open to what those may be and give them freely. You can also purposefully decide to take charge. And this idea reminds me of a great quote from Abraham Lincoln that goes like this: "Most folks are as happy as they make up their minds to be." I love this quote because it really does remind us that we have control over how we feel and that we are indeed in charge. And then the last piece, to just be a friend. This means so much, and for us military kids, we get really good at this. But we'll talk about this a little bit more specifically in just a bit. First, I thought we would first talk about one of the more difficult parts about making friends, that initial contact or that first time that you find yourself having to approach someone. Certainly, if you're nervous about someone, that's okay, about talking to someone. And quickly, I'll just share this little story. There was a guy who's famous in my profession of counseling whose name was Albert Ellis. And to paraphrase a story straight out of Wikipedia, he was so incredibly shy about talking to people in general that he made for himself a goal one month to talk to 100 people while sitting at a park bench in New York. He did this to try to overcome his shyness about talking to people, and this was certainly a challenge for him. He confronted this fear head-on, though, and as a result, he overcame it. And ultimately, he became one of the most influential people in the whole counseling world. He had to overcome this particular difficulty first, though, and I'm not saying that any of you should take it to that extreme, but remembering to put yourself out there will have its rewards and will diminish the discomfort of it over time. So with that, here are some more specific things that you can do to be helpful with this first initial contact. And again, at the top of the list is the idea of smiling. You can always smile. You can take a deep breath. You can try to speak a little more slowly than usual. You can make your voice more clear. You can take your time. And finally, it's helpful not to worry about being nervous. And this is kind of a funny thing to point out, but it speaks about being nervous. And you can see how that can just grow and grow and grow out of control if you let it. It's helpful to just shut it down when you recognize it and to not let the nervous get to you. Acknowledge it and think about it a bit like a roller coaster. The part before you get on is the worst part. And but once you're in and locked into your seat, you start up that hill, and there's no getting off. And really, everything from there is, to sound cliche, downhill. Everything is downhill from there. And it's the same with talking to people. Once you overcome that initial discomfort or the anxiety prior to doing it, once you start, it really is downhill. There's a great little video that you can watch by clicking on the link for PCS Moving the Great Adventure from the Military OneSource website. And then there's a tab for family and relationships, and then a link for military youth on the move. And the PCS The Great Adventure is on a ticker at the bottom. You can find this and a whole host of other relevant articles, recordings, and videos on PCSing from the kids' perspective on off that link called Military Youth on the Move. This little video in particular, though, does a really good job of identifying the, quote, adventure associated with moving and has some specific tips for making friends. Take a look. It's about 15 minutes and talks about the value of, very specifically, of having a smile, having an open posture, saying your name, and speaking clearly. Okay. And finally, the most important tip, once again, is to be a friend. You certainly can make the best friends by being one yourself. I think there's probably all kinds of things that we would identify as for ourselves as part of being a friend. Certainly things like being there when your friend is in need, or listening when your friend wants to talk, or helping when your friend needs help. Concepts like honesty and trust, sticking with a friend whether it's in good times or in bad. and probably 1,000 more things that you can think of that define for you what being a good friend is. I'll share these 2 quotes quickly. It was author C.S. Lewis who wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, for those of you that are familiar. And he said about friendship, "Friendship is born at the moment when one person says to another, 'What, you too? I thought I was the only one.'" Or perhaps this line by poet William Blake is worth thinking about just a bit as well. "A bird, a nest, a spider, a web, the human, a friendship." So again, you have to be a friend to make a friend. And then so finally in this presentation, we'll spend a few minutes talking about the grades associated with changing schools. And here's some ideas for keeping your grades up as you go along. And the first, of course, is not to get stressed out if the other kids are a little ahead of you in their studies. It's certainly not a competition. It is, however, important that you are caught up with the teacher's expectation. It's understood that you've moved, but sometimes this doesn't mean, but sometimes this may mean that you have to work extra hard. Again, it's okay if it takes a while to get caught up, and really, how could it not? You're brand new in the school, and everything is different. But you do want to make sure that you're, again, keeping up with what the teacher's expectations are. If you feel like you're behind, definitely take the necessary steps to get caught up. And you don't have to do this on your own. Certainly ask your parents and teachers, or just letting them know what you're feeling, and they can certainly help. That's what they're there for. And once they are aware, then they can put into play all kinds of helpful ideas for making it a little easier for you. You certainly won't have been the first person to have gotten a little behind, and they'll know exactly what to do. Also, you can consider joining or forming even your own study group. It's extremely likely that you're not the only person who might need some more work and time on certain bits of material, and having others around sharing in the work and the learning can really be helpful, and it can also make the work of studying a little more tolerable. And then finally, consider creating a consistent and realistic schedule for doing your homework. Every family is different in how after-school timing works, but making time for homework that is expected, reinforced, and consistent can make it a little bit less of a struggle to actually get sitting down to do it. With those suggestions, I'd also like to point out that the Military OneSource website, again, has all kinds of articles, even webinars and videos and recordings on dealing with school and on PCSing in general. You'll find links all over that will lead you to even more great and personalized information that you might find helpful, including a website called militarykidsconnect.dcoe.mil. Also, your parents or you could even call Military OneSource and speak with one of the consultants here. And that number, if you aren't aware, is 1-800-342-9647. And from there is just an endless array of resources that can be helpful. All right, so in summary, changing schools can be scary. There are positives to changing schools, such as getting to make a fresh start. Try to get to know about your new school before you start. Joining clubs and sports activities can be a great way to meet people. Making friends takes time. And don't be afraid to ask parents and teachers for help if you're having problems adjusting to your new school. All right, were there any questions?
We do have a couple of questions that have come in, Mike. The first question reads, my 9-year-old is getting ready to start the 4th grade in a brand new school. We moved here 3 weeks ago, and she has already made a couple of friends in the neighborhood, thankfully. She'll have to ride the bus for the first time, though, and this is something that seems to be most worried about. Any tips for helping her feel comfortable getting on the bus for the first day?
Sure, and that certainly is a great question. You know, when we think about school and changing schools, we often think about the academics and the friend making and all of that. But sometimes it's just that very beginning part of that very first day that's the hard part. And I think it's possible some kids can find themselves focusing on just that very first piece. And, there's certainly a lot of things you can do as a parent. You can certainly, scout out the bus stop ahead of time with your child and allow her to familiarize herself a little bit with where it is and how it will be when the bus comes. I'd say it's certainly reasonable to wait with your child that first day and actually, climb a stair or two of the bus itself to greet the bus driver and introduce perhaps your child to the bus driver. And all of those things can kind of ease your daughter into that seat. Although it may not be the only thing that's causing her some anxiety, you might be able to call the school as well to find a little bit out about what will happen when she gets off the bus, who will tell her where to go, and even prep her a little for that. So it's there are some suggestions. I think those are the ones that would probably occur to us. So I'd also add that it's certainly reasonable to call the school ahead of time to find out what some of the process may be. All right, I hope that's helpful.
Great. Next question reads, my son is starting his senior year of high school this year, and we know we are going to have to move midway through the year. He wants to graduate with his class where he has been for the last 2 years and do all the things seniors do with them. He really doesn't want to leave. He's 17 already and will be 18 by the time we move. Any ideas of how to help him prepare for this one?
Wow. Well, as I think about changing schools, I think to do so as a senior may well represent one of the hardest things that has to be done. I know how ingrained kids are with their senior class, especially if they've been there for a couple of years. There's a few things that I suggest. It's certainly having as open a line of communication with your son as possible is just of greatest value. Hopefully he would be comfortable to share with you some of the concerns he may have, some of the expected losses that he may feel, and the resistance that he may have to doing so. It is a tough time. There's a number of things I think can be done ahead of time to start preparing for that, and certainly checking into the new area, checking into the new school, finding out about things like clubs and academics and how their system works for knowing that he has all the necessary classes to graduate. All of that can serve to ease or some of the anxiety associated with the change. And then really encouraging him to take advantage of the time that he has with the friends he has at the current school. But beyond all that, I would just reemphasize how important it is to maintain some open lines of communication between him and you parents. And there's certainly a lot of ways to do that as well. But if you're finding that to be one of the more difficult aspects, you can certainly consider the Military OneSource phone number, and that can potentially link you up with counseling. That could be, anything from family counseling where you could all go and have someone sort of guide the discussion, or even something perhaps just for him where he could go and talk to, someone who isn't so connected with you all. And as long as he's between 13 and 17, he can participate in those sessions with a counselor on his own. So those are just some ideas, and I hope those are helpful, and I'll leave it at that.
Great. Well, at this time, we don't have any other questions that have come in, so I would like to thank you, Michael Scott, for sharing your invaluable experience and expertise. I would also like to thank our attendees for participating in today's webinar, and if you have any questions after the webinar is over, please email moswebinars@militaryonesource.com, and I'll send the questions over to our presenter for an answer. This concludes today's webinar on challenges of changing schools. Thank you all for attending, and have a great day.